It started on a rainy Tuesday afternoon outside a small courthouse in downtown Springfield. I had just stepped out of my car, umbrella tucked under my arm, briefcase in hand. The parking lot was nearly full, so I had taken a space a few blocks away and walked briskly toward the courthouse entrance. I was running slightly behind schedule for a post-lunch docket review. But I wasn't in robes yet. Just my gray pantsuit, low heels, and a simple pearl necklace. As I reached the corner across from the courthouse steps, I heard loud voices, an argument near a parked police cruiser. A young man appeared to be getting ticketed for something trivial. He didn't seem aggressive, just frustrated. Then I noticed the officer's voice rising. "Back up. This is none of your business," he barked at a bystander who had started recording with his phone. I kept walking, not stopping to interfere, until the officer's attention turned to me. "You too," he snapped, pointing directly at me. "Step away from the scene." I paused. "I'm not involved. Just walking to court," I said calmly, motioning toward the courthouse doors. He didn't listen. "Did I stutter?" he shouted, marching toward me. "You don't get to ignore commands from law enforcement." Before I could finish saying, "I'm a judge," he shoved me hard. The umbrella slipped from my hand. I stumbled sideways, my briefcase dropping with a loud thud. Gasps came from onlookers nearby. "You just assaulted her," someone cried out. But the officer didn't stop. He grabbed my wrist and twisted it behind my back. I gritted my teeth, not from the pain, but from the sheer disbelief. I had presided over hundreds of cases in this very building. I had ruled on matters of law far beyond his clearance. And now, here I was, being manhandled on the courthouse steps by someone who didn't even ask for ID. And he still didn't know who I was. He yanked me toward the cruiser, hands still locked around my wrist. "You're obstructing an investigation," he barked, pressing me against the hood. Rain spattered against the metal, cold against my cheek. I looked up and locked eyes with a young officer standing nearby, clearly startled. "Do you even know who she is?" a woman yelled from the sidewalk, filming the entire thing. Her voice was trembling with disbelief. "That's Judge Harmon. That's Judge Marcia Harmon." The grip on my wrist froze. The officer's eyes narrowed. "Judge?" I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The young officer stepped forward quickly, his voice low but urgent. "Sir, I think there's been a mistake. She's a sitting judge here. Department 7. The handcuff snapped open. The silence around us was instant, and deafening. The bystanders who had once looked on in confusion were now recording everything. One man was already on a call. A court clerk had stepped outside, stunned. "You need to stop this right now," the younger officer whispered. "We're going to have a serious problem." The officer who'd grabbed me looked pale. He didn't speak. He didn't apologize. He just stared. I stood tall, brushing off my blazer, and picked up my briefcase from the wet pavement. Then I turned and looked him dead in the eyes. "You just put your hands on a superior court judge without cause," I said evenly, my voice cold and steady. "You made a decision based on your own assumptions. And now, those few seconds are going to follow you for the rest of your life." The door behind me opened. 2 court security officers had come out. One of them recognized me immediately. "Judge Harmon? Are you all right?" I nodded. "Escort me inside. And contact the presiding judge. We'll be handling this immediately." As I stepped into the marble-floored lobby of the courthouse, the air shifted. Security guards straightened. Clerks paused mid-conversation. Eyes turned to me, not because I was late for docket, but because word was already spreading. The soaked shoulder of my blazer and the faint red mark on my wrist said enough. "Judge Harmon, are you?" "I'm fine," I said, cutting gently but firmly. "Please alert Judge Kavanaugh and court administration. And get me surveillance footage from the west entrance." Now. The officer who'd struck me hadn't followed inside. But I knew he hadn't left. Not yet. He'd made the kind of mistake you don't walk away from without consequences. Upstairs, I was quickly ushered into a conference room where Judge Kavanaugh, the court's presiding judge, stood waiting. He was mid-60s, calm, and sharp as a razor. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low. I told him everything. Concisely. No drama. Just facts. By the end of it, his jaw had tightened. "We're requesting internal affairs. Now. This is going straight to the chief's desk. I'd like to be involved in the statement," I added. He gave a nod. "Absolutely. And Marcia, this building backs you. 100%. Downstairs, I could already hear a commotion brewing. Reporters. Cell phones. City officials being notified. The officer, his name, I'd later learn, was Cole Renner, was now sitting in a squad car, staring blankly through the windshield, his face ghost white. A deputy chief had arrived on scene, clearly blindsided by what had just unraveled on the courthouse steps. And the footage? Crystal clear. Multiple angles. Multiple witnesses. The moment he shoved me. The look on his face. My words. The bystanders screaming once they recognized me. There would be no debate, no gray area, no PR spin. The evidence was undeniable. By late afternoon, the courthouse felt like the epicenter of a brewing storm. Deputy Chief Halvorsen, a seasoned officer with 20 years under his belt, arrived in person. He didn't shake my hand. He didn't offer excuses. He simply said, "We're placing Officer Renner on immediate administrative leave. Internal Affairs has already been activated." I nodded. "That's the least of it." He looked me square in the eye. "Judge Harmon, I've seen the footage. I have no defense to offer you. No explanation that would make this acceptable." "Then don't try," I replied. "Let the facts speak." Within hours, the city's police commission had convened an emergency session. What had started as a local incident now had state-level attention. I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in accountability. And accountability was moving faster than I'd ever seen. That evening, Officer Renner's name began trending on social media. Not just locally, but nationally. Clips from the courthouse surveillance footage, combined with bystander recordings, were already circulating. The public didn't know everything, but they knew enough. A uniformed officer had shoved and handcuffed a respected judge outside her own courtroom without asking a single question. The city's mayor released a cautious statement: "We are deeply troubled by what has been brought to light. We take judicial integrity, and public trust, extremely seriously. There will be a full investigation." Behind closed doors, I received 3 separate calls, from the Attorney General's office, the State Bar Committee, and the Governor's liaison. All of them offering support, all of them preparing for the fallout. Officer Renner. By 6 p.m., he was officially suspended without pay. By 7 o'clock, every case he had touched in the past 6 months was being reviewed for procedural violations. And by 9 o'clock, his name had been stripped from the duty roster. His badge was no longer active. His gun was surrendered. His career wasn't just damaged, it was collapsing, piece by piece. And I had said nothing to the press. Yet. I sat in my chambers as the city buzzed with the fallout. Reporters were camped outside. My inbox had flooded with messages, from colleagues, old law school peers, and even complete strangers. Some offered support. Others apologized, ashamed that something like this could still happen to someone in my position. But I wasn't surprised. People often look at a robe and think it grants immunity from being misjudged, ignored, or mishandled. It doesn't. What it gives is responsibility. And I intended to use mine carefully. I had declined every media request that day. I didn't post anything. I didn't appear in front of any cameras. And yet, my silence spoke volumes. By sunrise the next morning, the police chief issued a rare video statement. We are aware of the disturbing incident involving Officer Cole Renner and Judge Marcia Harmon. We have begun a formal investigation, and the officer in question has been suspended. We are committed to upholding the law, with no exceptions. City council members started issuing individual statements. Several hinted at broader concerns within the department. Whispers of prior complaints about Officer Renner surfaced, complaints buried or dismissed without proper review. And then came the statement from the State Judiciary Oversight Board: we are deeply disturbed by the incident involving a sitting judge on public property. Judicial independence and personal safety are non-negotiable principles. We are watching this matter very closely. I returned to the bench that afternoon, this time in my robe. I walked through the courthouse lobby without a word. No fanfare. No speech. Just the quiet recognition of every officer, clerk, and attorney who passed me, with widened eyes and newfound respect. What Officer Renner had done in 30 seconds was irreversible. But what he never anticipated, what broke him before the investigation could even conclude, was the fact that he didn't just assault a judge. He misjudged someone who knew the system better than he did. And now, the system was responding. By the end of the week, the pace of Renner's downfall had accelerated beyond repair. The district attorney's office, pressured by both public scrutiny and judicial advocacy groups, announced a formal review not only of Renner's conduct, but of his entire disciplinary history. Old body cam footage was unsealed. Patterns began to emerge. Small things, mostly, dismissive behavior, ignored protocol, unresolved complaints. But together, they painted a picture. A picture of someone who acted first and asked questions later. The city's Civilian Oversight Committee, which had long been criticized as toothless, was now suddenly alive and aggressive. Hearings were scheduled. Witnesses were called. Legal analysts on every major network discussed how unprecedented it was for such action to happen this quickly, especially involving a judge. But this wasn't about me anymore. It was bigger. A quiet conversation had started echoing in legal circles across the state: if a judge could be shoved, cuffed, and humiliated steps away from her courtroom, how safe was anyone else? And that question? It scared people. I was contacted by the Judicial Integrity Alliance to testify about the experience. Not in court, but before a legislative subcommittee. They wanted change. Real policy change. A bill was drafted within 72 hours requiring immediate identity verification by officers on duty when dealing with individuals on public property, especially near judicial or government buildings. Meanwhile, Officer Renner's union rep tried to halt proceedings. Claimed confusion, adrenaline, a misread situation. But the footage didn't lie. He didn't just misread a situation. He dismissed a woman's voice, ignored context, and acted on impulse, without cause, warrant, or command. He acted like no one was watching. But they were. And now, everyone was. 2 weeks later, the public disciplinary hearing began. It wasn't held behind closed doors. No sealed documents. No quiet settlements. The city made sure this one stayed open. Transparent. On the record. I was asked to testify. And I did. Calmly. Clearly. Without theatrics. I described what happened, step by step. Not with anger, but precision. Because this wasn't personal anymore. It was professional. It was about precedent. When I finished, the hearing room was silent. Then they played the footage, angle after angle. The bystander's phone recording. The courthouse camera. The cruiser dashcam. Every frame showed what couldn't be excused. The moment Officer Renner laid hands on me. The moment he ignored my words. The moment he assumed authority without checking facts. Then came witness statements. The young officer who had tried to intervene. The court clerk who recognized me. Even the man who had called 911, not to report a crime, but to document an abuse of authority. By the end of the second day, Renner's attorney requested a recess. But it was too late. The panel voted unanimously. Officer Cole Renner has violated departmental policy, failed in his duty to uphold public safety, and exercised force without lawful justification. His employment is hereby terminated effective immediately. No pension. No severance. And the State Certification Board announced an emergency review of his eligibility to serve in any law enforcement capacity, anywhere in the state. His badge? Gone. His gun? Already surrendered. And his reputation? Shattered. Renner's dismissal sent shockwaves well beyond Springfield. Other departments took notice. Quiet memos circulated within law enforcement agencies statewide, urging updated training, stricter verification protocols, and a renewed emphasis on de-escalation. The judiciary was watching too. Several judges I'd never met reached out personally. Some shared similar stories, moments where their title had meant nothing until after damage was done. Moments they hadn't spoken about. Until now. But this moment? It changed that. News outlets kept running the headline, "Judge mistaken for civilian assaulted by officer, career ends in public collapse." Though the articles never highlighted my skin color or my background, the implication hung in the air: this wasn't just a mistake. It was a symptom. A symptom of a deeper issue, a failure to see people before assumptions. I was invited to speak on a national panel about judicial protections and officer accountability. I accepted. Not to relive the incident, but to push for progress. If anything good could come from that shove, it would be this: no one should have to wear a robe to be treated with basic respect. And no one wearing a badge should forget that respect works both ways. Officer Renner had made a split-second decision based on appearances, and it ended his career. Not because of politics. Not because of pressure. Because of proof. Undeniable, unshakable proof that no title, officer or judge, places anyone above the law. Springfield eventually settled back into its rhythm, but it was never quite the same. Every officer now greeted courthouse staff by name. The metal detectors beeped as usual, the bailiffs called the daily calendars, but there was a new sense of awareness in the air. A quiet accountability. A learned respect. No policy could enforce that shift. It had to be earned the hard way. One morning, as I entered the building, I noticed a new sign mounted near the security checkpoint: "All personnel are public servants first. Verify, then act." Respect is standard, not optional. I hadn't asked for it. I didn't even know who commissioned it. But I paused to read it anyway. Then kept walking. Weeks later, Officer Renner made a brief appearance in local news again. He had filed an appeal to reverse his decertification, but it was denied unanimously. The board's reasoning was simple: this was not a momentary lapse. It was a willful failure to listen, to verify, and to show restraint. The consequences reflect the seriousness of that breach. He had vanished from the city after that. No statements. No interviews. Just silence. But I wasn't angry. I hadn't pressed criminal charges. I didn't seek vengeance. Only truth. And the truth did its job. The courthouse now used the incident as part of its orientation for both new officers and visiting interns. It became a case study, not in punishment, but in responsibility. And every time I took the bench, I didn't have to remind anyone who I was. I didn't need to. Because now, the entire system remembered for me. Months later, I found myself standing alone in courtroom 3, long after the day's cases had ended. The windows glowed with the gold light of sunset, casting long shadows across the polished floors. I looked at the bench. At the seal behind it. At the empty rows of pews where arguments had risen and verdicts had fallen. This place had always felt sacred to me, not because of power, but because of duty. The robe I wore didn't make me untouchable. It made me responsible. Responsible for fairness. For balance. For upholding the very principles that had nearly been ignored when I was treated like an afterthought on the courthouse steps. But the irony was this: what Officer Renner did because he didn't recognize me, ended up reminding the entire justice system who I was. Not just a judge. Not just a woman. But a citizen whose dignity was not optional. The fallout from that single moment reshaped policies, rewrote training standards, and forced a long overdue conversation. Not because I demanded it, but because silence would have meant acceptance. And I refused to accept it. Before I turned off the courtroom lights that evening, I glanced once more at the bench, at the symbol of law and order that so many assume only applies once you're inside the courtroom. But the truth? It applies just as much outside, on the steps, in the street, at the first point of contact. That's where justice starts. Not with the robe. Not with the badge. But with how we treat each other before we know each other's titles. And in that simple truth, Officer Renner lost everything. But the system gained something far more important: clarity.